Erev Tov Tivon, Boker Tov, San Francisco. Greetings to all of our friends around the United States, around Israel, and around the world. It sounds like already people are chatting about the weather. Before we've even started, it sounds like it's a crappy day pretty much everywhere. I'm hearing about chilly and windy in Tel Aviv and in North Carolina. And anybody who stayed up late and watched the Green Bay Packers lose to San Francisco know that the Midwest is really cold. So West Haven, Connecticut, we're glad to have you here today. Providence, Rhode Island, I see Herzliya, Nashua, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Chicago, New Orleans, Weston, Florida, Dallas, Villanova, Pennsylvania, Park City, Utah, where it's sunny, Detroit, Michigan, San Diego. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being with us here today. We're going to take you away. I wish I could say that I was going to take you away from all of our troubles today, but this morning there were tremors. This was well before we decided to go to Beit Alpha, but indeed there were some tremors, and we're going to hear from Reuven that we got nothing to worry about. Everybody's okay, but we do have some headlines coming, not from ancient times, but from today. So thanks for being with us. Scottsdale, Central Florida, Leeds, United Kingdom, New York, Winnipeg, our friends in Canada. It's snowy, but you're with us. Look at our background. No snow today, as far as I know. From anything I've heard in Israel, we only have these earthquakes to be worried about. Haifa, kilometer 101 in Israel. Wow. We've got Mivatzeret Zion, Johannesburg, South Africa, Netanya, Northern Galilee. We have got a geographically dispersed group to go on a virtual tour today. Keep telling us where you're from. Complain all you want about the weather, because we can promise you one thing on this trip, this virtual trip, you don't have to worry about anything. You could stay right where you're at and enjoy the show. My favorite tour guide and yours, Reuven Solomon, is here with me to take us on an amazing journey today. Reuven, first start with the headline and tell us about, what we didn't expect to wake up to this morning. Our friends and in the vicinity of Tiberias, Afula, Beit Alpha, everybody's okay there, right? But they got a little scared.
Absolutely. Well, let me tell you that at the background, you can see Tel Beit She'an. And Tel Beit She'an became the Pompeii of Israel, we call it. We nickname it because it was frozen in time by a massive earthquake on the 18th of January, 749 CE, AD, that is. And the epicenter of that earthquake that flattened Beit She'an and many other places in Israel is the same epicenter where we've had two minor, less than 4 on the Richter scale earthquakes, one yesterday on Saturday and one around noon today. And they felt it in Beit She'an. They felt it in around the Sea of Galilee, of course, as well, because the epicenter is actually, some of you might know the place, you might have even stayed there, the Galei Kinneret Hotel at the, a little outside, south of Tiberias, was the epicenter then. And today it moved a little bit further south, but it still affected the same line, Beit She'an and everywhere else. But you don't have to worry. We're not going to have any earthquakes on this virtual tour. And I would like to take you now to what we call the Pompeii of Israel, Beit She'an.
Take us away, Reuven.
First and foremost, let me show you where it is on the map. As I said, Beit She'an, the Pompeii of Israel, and on the map you can see that it is in a very strategic location. It is between Jordan, inland, and the sea. It is also between the Galilee and Jerusalem, and it is also the link between the Jordan Valley and the Jezreel Valley. Beit She'an has a very rich history. And in the next slide, I want to show you what it ended up looking at like before the massive earthquake. What you're seeing in front of you in this slide is the theater, and around it, an enlarged city. This is a model. This is a model. We're going to see the real thing as well. And behind the theater, with a temple built or rebuilt up on top of a mound that was the Beit She'an, Skytopolis, right up until the 1st century BC AD, the transit point. All of Beit She'an was that mound that you see, Tel Beit She'an. And everyone, most archaeologists of that day actually dabbled in excavating part of Beit She'an, digging into the sides of the Tel, but no one really realized what was around it in the lower city. And today we know that it was an enormous city, uncovered. It was, in fact, for many decades, the largest archaeological excavation in Israel. And it had slowly but surely been uncovered. While we have a look around at this model, I want to tell you a little bit of the history of this ancient Tel that, together with the lower city, counts 25 identifiable, clearly marked strata of 25 different civilizations. You can see that the whole area later on was surrounded by a Tel. But when the first archaeologists dug on the top of the mound and then into the sides of the mound, not realizing what was around them, they realized that they were talking about a settlement that was as early as the 5th millennium BC. And the real impressive structures that they found on top of the Tel that later on becomes the Acropolis of the enlarged city was from the Egyptian dynasty period of Thutmose III. In fact, in around 1500 BCE, the Egyptians had their district capital on top of that mound with nothing really of substance around it. The Egyptians give way eventually to the Canaanites who occupy that site. And then for a period of the struggle with the Israelites and the Philistines, the Israelites are unable to conquer Beit She'an, and it becomes a Philistine stronghold. It is in this period that the Bible tells us something about what happened on the walls of that Tel that lie before you. And I would like to read a short reading from the book of Samuel, first book of Samuel, that tells us what happened on the walls of that Acropolis. And it came to pass, I'm reading from Samuel chapter 31, 8. And it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistine came to strip the slain, that they found Shaul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head and stripped off his armor and sent it into the land of the Philistine round about to publish it in the house of their idols and among the people. And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the walls of Beit She'an. That was when it was a Philistine conquered area. But in the time of Solomon, it becomes part of the enlarged area of the Israelites. Following Solomon's demise and the split of the kingdoms, the Assyrians conquer the northern parts of Israel and pretty much destroy Beit She'an. It is the Greeks who, after the time of Alexander the Great, establish a Hellenistic city on the top of that Tel, and they call it Skytopolis. They call it Skytopolis from the legend of Dionysus, the god of wine, who his nurse Nisa is supposedly buried there, and thus Scythians come and settle there, and it becomes a city of Gentiles, pagans, Greeks, until, of course, the Hasmonean victory against the Seleucids, the Greeks, the Seleucids. And in the Hasmonean period, around 140 BC, the majority population of Scythopolis, it's still only the mound on top. The majority population of Scythopolis becomes predominantly Jewish. It is in this period, 63 BC, that the Roman general Pompey begins the Roman rule in this land. And he, in the Roman period, they decide to make Beit She'an a decapolis. The Romans had a process of making tax-free zones, 10 cities, that's why decapolis. And this is the only one of their 10, they eventually had more than 10 cities, but this was the only one of the cities that they called capitals, tax-free zones, that is on this side of the Jordan River. All the rest are on the other side of the Jordan River. This gives us the clue as to why and how Beit She'an becomes from a tell, from a mound, it becomes a sprawling city. And in the next slide, you're going to see the model in its entirety. In the next slide, where you will see how it expands in this, somewhere between around 40 BC to 5-6 AD, where Beit She'an expands from the tell that you see with a building on top of it to a sprawling walled city around. It is towards the end of the early Roman period that the Jewish war breaks out against the Romans, and in 66, a terrible event takes place in Beit She'an. I would like to read for you the description of it in Josephus's book, The Jewish War, because it is surprisingly different in its context to all the rest of what Josephus writes, and we'll talk about it, but let me first of all read for you Josephus's description of what happened in Beit She'an. So the Jews had been attacking foreigners, but when they raided Scythopolis, that is Beit She'an, they found the Jews there opposed to them, for they lined up with the Scythopolitans and treated their own safety as of more importance than their ties of blood. They joined battle with their countrymen, but suspicion was aroused by this excess of zeal. The citizens feared that these men would attack the city in the night and bring a great disaster upon them in order to compensate their fellow Jews for their failure to support them. So they ordered them, if they wished to prove their loyalty and demonstrate their fidelity to their foreign neighbors, to go with their families into the grove. The Jews carried out the order, suspecting nothing, and for 2 days the Scythopolitans made no move, thus deceiving them into thinking themselves safe. But on the third night, they watched their opportunity when some of them were off their guard and others asleep, slaughtered them all, more than 13,000 of them. Josephus had a habit of slightly exaggerating numbers, but certainly if he says 13,000, there are a lot of them, and looted the property of the whole colony. An account must be given of the fate of Simon. His bodily strength and personal courage were exceptional, but to the injury of his countrymen, he abused both. He went out every day and killed many of the Jews attacking Scythopolis. Often he routed their whole army and won the battle almost unaided, but he was overtaken by the punishment he had deserved by the slaughter of his own flesh and blood. When the men of Scythopolis surrounded the grove and began to shoot down the men inside, He drew his sword, but made no move towards the enemy as he saw their overwhelming numbers. Instead, he exclaimed with great emotion, "It serves me right for what I have done. I and the rest who have murdered so many of our own kith and kin to prove our loyalty to you Scythopolitans. Small wonder we have found foreigners treacherous when we have utterly betrayed our own nation. So let us die in disgrace by our own hands. We are not fit to die by those of the enemy. The same act can be the punishment my foul deeds deserve and the proof of my courage, so none of my foes shall boast over my death or gloat over my body." So saying, he glanced around with a look of mingled pity and rage at his own family, wife, children, and aged parents. Then first seizing his father by his gray hairs, he ran him through with a sword. Next, he killed his unresisting mother, and finally his wife and children, each of them almost falling on the sword, so eager were they to forestall the enemy. Then Simon, having gone through all his family, stood over the bodies in view of everyone, and raising his right hand aloft for all to see, plunged the whole length of the blade into his own throat. We may well feel pity for the young man in view of his prowess and courage, but his trust in foreigners made his tragic end inevitable. What an incredible thing for Josephus to write. Josephus, the ultimate apologist, who was against fighting against the Romans after the initial battles, makes that statement very surprisingly. And that can only indicate the horror of the events that took place there at Beit She'an. In the, Beit She'an, I mentioned, becomes the Scythopolis, the Pompeii, of Israel, because of an earthquake, a massive earthquake that on the 18th of January, 749, with its epicenter slightly south of Tiberias, destroyed and buried Beit She'an under so much rubble that even those who excavated the mound that was above the rubble, did not realize what was around them. I hope no archaeologists of the future are going to be delighted as the archaeologists of today were delighted that this is the way Beit She'an was covered up, because, there's nothing better for an archaeologist than a really good earthquake. If you want to understand what it means, try to imagine a beautifully set, for example, Sabbath table, with a table with a white tablecloth and the wine and the fruit and the plates and the cutlery and the flowers and everything nicely set up on the table. Come along to the edge of the table, grab an end of that tablecloth and give it a really good whack. What's going to happen? Everything's going to fall over. Usually in the same direction because of the direction of like an earthquake, the direction of the pull. And thus, if you wanted to set up that table again, it's quite easy. It'll be broken and damaged. Of course, some of the glassware will be broken and there'll be spills and mess everywhere, but you can pick everything up and put it back to where it was and see what it was before the earthquake. And this is what has happened to Beit She'an. In the next slide, you're going to actually see Beit She'an of today. Some of the pillars that were toppled over in sequence that could be easily relifted and set back to exactly where they were, if you like the analogy, on the Sabbath table. And thus, much of Beit She'an was able to be re-brought to life by picking up what had fallen and raising it. In fact, not so long ago, less than 4 decades ago, there was a great thought of renewing Beit She'an, making it a historic site with Roman shops and marketplaces and bathhouse and so on. And investment was made. And then, of course, trouble hit with all sorts of events that you may remember almost brought tourism to a halt in 2000. And since there was some interest in renewing this process of rebuilding the city. That's why you see so many of the elements around marked with numbered where they were found, waiting to be reset and rebuilt into the way it was once upon a time. What you see in the slide before you is the tell in the background and the vomitorium of the entry. Vomitorium is the term used for an entry into theater. And when we get to the theater, we'll talk a little bit about the vomitorium and the very special element in the double entry. One is a dead end that had a great part of the technology of the day in the Beit She'an theater. But first, we're going to visit the bathhouse. The bathhouse you can see to the left, and now we're going to move into the bathhouse and see a few still slides of this Western bathhouse that is one of the largest and most magnificent that we have found. There's in the distance the bathhouse, and we're going to enter and see a few of the elements in the bathhouse to get an impression of its beauty. In the following slide, you shall see the courtyard. Surrounding the courtyard are many private rooms, private bathrooms, heated, of course, like this one, for instance, tiled. And in the following slide, like this one, you will see baked clay, where the heat would be passed under marble seats, where bathers could sit and be attended to around these marbled seats. Some of the marble has remained, but most of it stripped away after the earthquake and then covered and forgotten in time. But there were also, of course, when you have lots of people visiting the bathhouse, you need conveniences for them. And in the following slides, you're going to see, don't use them, the plumbing's not working anymore, the Roman restrooms. Yes, you're seeing them in front of you. No separation of cubicles. Each one of those little holes you see there is a private bathroom for one person. They all carried their own cubicles with them. What do I mean by that? They all wore gowns, togas, and squatting over those seats, the toga would give them the privacy they needed. There was no gentlemen and ladies, unisex bathrooms, because everyone had their own cubicles with them. Another couple of slides to show you a little bit more of this bathroom that was tiled with marble tiles. And now we see the real purpose of the bathhouse. The Roman bathhouse worked on what we call the hypocast or hypocast system of burning wood passed under a hollow floor. What you're seeing in this slide are the clay pillars made of slabs of clay, pancakes of clay, if you like, holding up a marble floor, and you can see the floor level by the iron walkway that has been placed just above it, with the hollow floor being fed with the heat. The one closest to the furnace would be the hot room, the caldarium. That's where you end your visit to the bathhouse. You start off with the frigidarium, which is the furthest away from the hot room, and make your way through to the tepidarium, the lukewarm room, before you go into this room, the caldarium, for the real experience. In the next couple of slides, you're going to see how the marble floors were supported in this caldarium. And you can see part of the original and part of the rebuilt. To the right-hand side, you're seeing very much of the original, and now to the left-hand side, very much of the original slabs of clay, with the lighter white clay being rebuilt to show the bases were there, of course. The bases are original, but the lighter white clay showing how the hollow was achieved underneath these bath floors. In the next couple of slides, I want to show you a little bit more before we move to the theater. Here we are in the Roman theater of Beit She'an. A short video, and you will be able to get an impression of the way the theater looked, and we're going to talk about the importance of the theater. And in the stills, I want to show you a few unique things, the technology of that time with the theater. Here you see the seats. They're all original seats that you're seeing there, limestone seats. Some of them have curved backing for your comfort of seating. The stage front, the original seats. And now we swing up to, oh, what are these ugly seats? Well, they're not seats. They are the basis of the seats. This is the basalt, the local rock that was coated with the proper limestone seats. Why aren't the limestone seats there? Recycled. Those were above ground. And what was above ground was stripped away and reused. But all of this, all of the original limestone was under tons of earth. And it was left untroubled. The Roman theater, the scanner fonts that you see in front of you, is set up with tall pillars and 2-3 stories high. The height of it, you're going to be able to imagine from the next slide that we're going to show you the view from the front of the theater to the seats themselves. And when we do that, you shall see in the next slide, from the theater, you're looking at the seating. If we go back one slide, you will see the seating from the back of from the stage of the theater. What you're seeing there, the first fan around the semicircle, are the original seats, limestone seats. Above it, the basalt basis of the limestone that has been stripped away. And above that, that hasn't survived, the wooden seats. Now imagine 3 fans of semicircle seats like that, with the top of them being the top of the scanner fronts, the top of the front of the theater, and shading afforded by the stretching of ropes from the top of the scanner fronts to the top of the seats, with canvas pulled across in strips to create some sort of shade. You know, you're seeing also the openings, and you see 1, 2, 3, 4 openings. There's a 5th one around the right of the slide that allow people in and out of the theater. One level for people in and out. It's the level the common folk used. The nobility would never come through the Vomitorium with the common folk. They would have their own entrance, and in the next couple of slides, you're going to see what I mean. They would sit in that semicircle, coming through that doorway into the theater, not on stage, but the one below the stage, and sit on sofas front center stage. It's the plebs who would sit up top, coming through the Vomitorium. Why were they called Vomitorium? Well, because at the end of performances, and if we follow in the next couple of slides, you're going to see the doorways I'm talking about that are Vomitorium. These are the Vomitorium. One of them is a sort of a dead end. In Caesarea and Caesarea, it's a total dead end. In other Roman theaters, it's a total dead end. Here, I'm going to show you that, curiously, it's not a total dead end, but it's not an entry either. And in the next couple of slides, you're going to see what I mean. Yeah, this is the one that's almost a dead end. When I say almost a dead end, you saw that little opening. And this is the slide that is the proper entrance, okay? They're right beside each other. So what's the one that is sort of a dead end? In the next slide, you'll see what I mean by sort of a dead end. This is what you would see if you went through that small opening that is sort of blocked off into a sort of an alcove, a balcony. And now I want to show you around the other side, after we've entered the theater, what it looks like from the other side, and to tell you what it actually is. Here we are. We're in the alcove that is at the end of the almost dead end. So what was this alcove used for? Some people at first thought maybe private boxes for the nobility. No, they sat down below, front stage center. They wouldn't sit up here with the plebs. And then we find in a book by a contemporary of Herod the Great, in other words, around 30 BC, a man called Vitruvius, a Roman, who writes about Roman engineering. He writes about how to build an arch, he writes about how to build a Roman bridge, and he also writes about how to enhance the acoustics in a Roman theater. He writes, and I paraphrase, if you place large bronze bowls filled to the brim with water at mid-level of the theater, you will create an amplification of the sound. I asked a sound engineer about this, and he said, it's brilliant. It's mechanical engineering without using electronics. It's amplification. The sound bounces off the water and fills the theater, amplifies the sound. Where are the bronze bowls? Obviously, they were taken away, too valuable to leave behind in the result of earthquake. But from the writings of Vitruvius, we know why they were at each one of the vomitorium at what was almost a dead end, and that entry was obviously for the attendants to make sure that those bronze bowls were always filled to the brim with water. And thus you had engineering of Roman loudspeakers amplification that long ago. In the next couple of slides, you're going to see another view of this amplification room. And now you're seeing one of the vomitorium to the right, but in front of you, a street that leads to the tell, the mound itself. That street has a particular name, Palladius Street, because of the dedication stone of a governor. I want to quickly take you down to that street now and show you some of the special events. So if we walk down to that street together in the next couple of slides. And another one. You'll see that we're now on the street, and you see the hump in the middle of the street. That is, of course, for underground, under pavement water drainage from the Roman baths. Now look at what you're looking at here. You're seeing mosaic, and then all of a sudden, building on top of the mosaic, a new mosaic following the old pattern, and on top of that, again, marble. What does that indicate? It indicates several earthquakes, minor ones at first that caused damage, and the easiest way to fix the damage was, instead of stripping everything away and refilling and rebuilding, to just build over. And thus, you build a step up, and you can see that that step up is literally a step up and a new flat level. And on top of that, yet another one. So there were at least two serious tremors that caused damage that had to be repaired. And this leads into a semicircle that we're going to quickly have a look at here in the next couple of slides, called the sigma. This is a semicircle where excavation has gone down to the Roman level, although in the Byzantine period, because following the Romans, the Byzantines take over, and of course, anything that was pagan was no longer required by the Byzantines, and anything that didn't fit with the morals of the time wasn't quite required. This sigma is in debate with many, some who believe was the Roman red light district, and others who say, no, it was an entertainment center. And the ones who proclaim it to be a Roman red light district base their theories on inscriptions. And as we go into some of the rooms there in the next slides, you're going to see some inscriptions in the next slide. In the following slides, you're going to see the rooms, very plain rooms, and one very special room. The one you're seeing here now is a very special room. It's got a beautiful mosaic that has a little story behind it that I want to tell you. The mosaic, the picture is, of course, of Taish, the goddess of plenty, with the horn of plenty filled to the brim, and as a crown, she's got the walls of the city on her hair. It's a room with a built-in closet, and the ones who believe this was the red light district of the Roman period believe that this might have been the room of the Madame, because in other rooms, and you might have seen it as we quickly went through the slides, there were inscriptions in Greek, some of them saying, "Ye women of Skytopolis, your beauty is unsurpassed," and things like that. So that gives but the story of the mosaic is well, sort of a sad story, because you may have noticed in that mosaic that her eyes are not quite right. Tish's eyes are not quite right, because when this mosaic was first uncovered, thank goodness it was measured and photographed and really studied, but it wasn't protected. It was an open site in the 1950s, in the early 1950s. And some resident of modern-day Beit She'an came by and said, "Oh, that's a pretty picture, I'm taking it home." And he took it home in buckets, and he put it under his bed. And it was only rediscovered shortly afterwards when he was arrested for some sort of theft. And part of the theft was these boxes of mosaic stones that were found under his bed. They had to be painstakingly put back together by experts who didn't quite get the eyes right. The original mosaic, if you have pictures of the original mosaic, are much better looking than poor Tish or Taish, who lost a little bit in translation. We're going to move on to the next couple of slides, where you see once again the tell and the destruction of the earthquake. Look at those enormous pillars that were the pillars that held up the Roman temple that came crashing down. Look in the next slide or two of how those enormous heavy pillars that two men would have trouble stretching out their arms around it, and a capital, beautiful Corinthian capital, tossed away like a feather from the falling of the pillars that crash through the roofs and bury themselves under the pavement. The terrible earthquake of 749 that froze Beit She'an and left it for us to discover and rebuild as much as we want to the way it was. Look at how that pillar snaps as it hits the wall, crashing through the roofs. That solid and enormous pillar, as I said, two men would need to stretch their arms around it for their fingers to touch together. That's how that's the circumference of those pillars. So Beit She'an frozen in time by that earthquake in 749. We're going to now move on to the next slide. And right by Beit She'an, not far away, in the foot of the Gilboa Mountains, is a couple of kibbutzim. Beit Alpha is one of the kibbutzim, but the Beit Alpha synagogue is actually in Kibbutz Hefzibah. Kibbutz Hefzibah was being prepared by pioneers in the late 1920s, and in 1929, as they were scraping away and digging channels for drainage, they uncovered a spectacular mosaic. In the next slide, you're going to see the pioneers discovering, if you like, the mosaic that is called the Beit Alpha mosaic, because the town that they were building their kibbutz on, the ancient biblical town, was called Beit Alpha. A kibbutz, a neighboring kibbutz, takes the name of that ancient town, but the Hefzibah is actually built on part of that town as well. It's a beautiful mosaic from the Talmudic period that was constructed around, we know exactly when it was constructed, because the synagogue constructors left us a sign saying that it was it was built in the time of Justinian I, which was in the 6th century CE, sometime in the 500s, where this beautiful mosaic synagogue, the mosaic floor of a synagogue was built. I want to show you a little bit of this mosaic, if I may, with the next slides. Now you're seeing, of course, the front of the synagogue that was, of course, oriented towards Jerusalem, because these were the days after the destruction of the temple, and the synagogue, being a sort of temporary replacement worship site, had to orient itself for worship to take place facing the Temple Mount. So anywhere you build a synagogue, anywhere in the world, you point the Torah Ark towards Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, of course, you pointed towards the Temple Mount itself. And because then everyone who's sitting around the benches that surround the synagogue, and you'll see that the benches surround the synagogue, would face the Torah Ark. In the next couple of slides, I want to show you quickly the beauty of the mosaics. Pillars separating the room. This is the central mosaic, of course. In the center, you're seeing a very curious thing for a mosaic in a synagogue. It's a mosaic of the Zodiac. And in the center is Helios, the sun god, with the quadriga, the four-horse-drawn chariot. Here you're looking at the top and the bottom sections of the mosaic. The top section, of course, depicts the ark, the Torah Ark, with the two roaring lions protecting it, and two menorah. Notice the difference between the legs of the two menorah. They're not exactly the same. One theory of why they're not exactly the same is by the 5th century, they didn't really know what legs the menorah had. Until, of course, today, we think we know, because we found from the time of the existence of the temple and the menorah, a stone etching of a menorah in Magdala on a Torah Ark table, that depicts the legs of the menorah that they knew that was in existence in that time. The bottom scene shows and we're going to have another look at it later, and another on a following slide. The bottom scene shows the near sacrifice of Isaac by Abraham. Here you're seeing the center. What I want to point out here is the Hebrew letters in the four corners and the four women who were dressed in appropriate clothing according to the season: spring, summer, autumn, winter, with the Hebrew month of the season actually written in Hebrew alongside her. The zodiac itself, with the 12 emblems of the zodiac, also with the Hebrew indication. The very center, Helios, the sun god, and his quadriga, the four-horse-drawn chariot. And how come in a synagogue? Because by then, graven image was considered only something that you worship. If it's a decoration, if it's something you walk on, it's a decoration, and that's all it is. So it became very permissible to have these decorations even in a synagogue. But you can see by the proportions and by the almost comic-like characterization of the figures, that this was a rather naive mosaic that may have been copied from somewhere else and performed by, I would say, well, I don't want to insult them, I would say not very well-known mosaic artists, because it is sort of innocent and naive, but that may be part of its beauty. I want to show you in the next couple of slides what I mean by that. First of all, it's, of course, the mosaic itself is surrounded by, I want to stop on this slide for a moment to tell you about three things. The scene of the Akedah, the near sacrifice of Isaac, and the two inscriptions that you see, one in Greek and one in Aramaic below it. The scene of the Akedah, you see Isaac, who is not a little baby, if you can make it out, he's already a young man, and Abraham, and you know that it's Abraham because his name is there. It's written in Hebrew above. And to the left of Abraham is the ram with its horns caught in a thicket. And that also, just in case you don't realize that's a ram caught in a thicket, its name in Hebrew is printed above or mosaiced above, Ayal. And the two servants are unnamed, but the hands you see coming out of a flame above the ram in the thicket has an inscription says, Al Tishlach, do not raise your hand against the boy. The instruction that Abraham has to halt the sacrifice. The two inscriptions, the one below in Aramaic, talk about how the community contributed their funds to build this synagogue for all, and talks about when it was built, in the time of Justinian. And the Greek above is something the Mosaic artists added, and it is the artists themselves who, Hanina and his father, who write that they are the makers of this. May they be blessed as the makers of this mosaic. So there you have the Beit Alpha mosaic. It is, as I said, maybe a little naive, but beautiful, but and surprising in its colors and its nature. Incidentally, the sign in Aramaic, you may notice with those two triangles, is what we call the tabula anseta. It's a sort of a carried notice board in the days of the Romans, where you would have this board with 2 years on it that you could hold on to and carry out instructions or proclamations for everyone to see. So it would draw your attention to that sign. And it's surprising that in some of the better hotels today, instead of the announcement coming over the PA system, a bellboy actually runs through with the tabula anseta, Mr. Smith, you have a call. Next slide, please, and we will proceed to a surprising story. And it's around the corner of the synagogue, literally around the corner in Kibbutz Hefzibah. It's the story of the Makuya. The Makuya, the name actually comes from, in Japanese, of course, tabernacle, the tent of meeting, or in Hebrew, ohel moed, the meeting tent. And that name was proposed by Abraham Tashima, a Japanese gentleman who was a little bit of an entrepreneur and I would say, searching Christian who did not accept the regimental Christianity, he said, and decided to form a more personal Christianity. He actually was in May of 1948, and it's not a coincidence, he forms the Makuya with followers who support Israel, Japanese Christian Zionists, in incredible support of Israel. In fact, even before Japan had any relations with Israel, that only happened in 1961, and that's the first time that Toshima was actually able to come to Israel to see the beloved Israel, he called it, and make arrangements for students to come and learn Hebrew in an ulpan in Kibbutz Hefzibah. And it's in Kibbutz Hefzibah that today the Makuya have built a beautiful Japanese garden. Abraham Tashima actually supported Israel in the Six-Day War in 1967, and more importantly, in 73, when he was already seriously, gravely ill, and Japan changed her stance from non-partisan to supporting the anti-Israel Arab boycott because of threats of oil sanctions. Toshima organized a massive protest of more than 3,000 men, women, and children who stretched over 2 kilometers of Japanese main road, singing and chanting joyous Israeli songs in support of Israel in 1973. He insisted on taking part personally in this demonstration, even though he was seriously ill. Sadly, some 3 weeks after this demonstration that helped to change the situation with Japan and Israel, 3 weeks after that, he passed away. May he be of blessed memory. Abraham Toshima, and the forming of the Makuya, the Japanese Christian Zionists. You're going to see some slides of the beauty of this garden, and we have a little bit of time, if you like, for discussion, for questions, as we see some of the beauty of these gardens in the slides. And let me tell you that these gardens are much more beautiful when you actually see them, not in slides, but in person. So put it on the list. Beautiful colors. And right at the foot of Mount Gilboa, where Saul and his sons fall in battle, and their bodies, and Saul's body is hung up on those walls that you see behind my head there. Questions, folks? Comments, whatever.
Boy, Reuben, you covered a lot of ground today, starting with the images and that beautiful or very dramatic reading of the fate of Saul in Beit She'an, and you took us right up to this beautiful story of supporters of Israel from Japan who have created these beautiful gardens, and it's a reminder to all of us that in the non-quarantine times, the pre-COVID times, that people from all over the world are visiting Israel normally. We're hoping that's going to return soon. But let me try to get to as many of the questions as we can. There's some of the people that joined late are just picking up the fact that there was an earthquake. Actually, it was not the Pompeii version of an earthquake. And I know you said that only archaeologists love earthquakes, apparently, for the preservational purposes, that is. But let's talk about what we do know. We actually have a couple interesting questions about the amphitheater. Do we know any, first of all, its size, for those people that are familiar with Caesarea, how would you compare the two in size and maybe grandeur? Are they equivalent?
The grandeur of the Beit She'an theater is much more, and also in size. With the 3 tiers, the wooden cheaper seats up above, more than 8,000 people could be accommodated in that theater. The grandeur of it also is in the originality of the seats themselves. They haven't been replaced like the seats in Caesarea mostly had to be replaced. These are the original limestone seats on the lower tiers, and the entrance and the pillars, they're all in their original, so easy to set back up again. The pillars I'm talking about, the seats didn't have to be reset, they're there. But so easy to be, the pillars so easy to be reset up where they belong, because they all fell like the implements that fell when we pulled that tablecloth from underneath the Sabbath table. Very easy to set everything back up again. But one more thing I want to tell you about the theater is that it sometimes is actually used as a theater. And I had the incredible fortune of sitting in one of those seats, one of the original seats on a stone seat with a curved backing, watching on stage the performance of Verdi's Nabucco, and to hear the song of the Hebrew slaves while you're looking at the tell that was there in that period, in that very period, when pum 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 pum. What an experience to sit there, to look at a tell that dated from before that period and after that period, and enjoy an opera in a theater. So it's a very special.
That's a great image, but it actually relates to one of the questions we had from Rochelle, is asking about the original performances. So I know it's hard to tell from the stones. They can't speak to us, but do we have any other sources, Reuben, Josephus, or otherwise, or what kind of performance? Was it music? Question about gladiators? Were there, the other things that we think of? What was going on in these, at least here in Beit She'an in the amphitheater?
Well, from what we know of the Roman performances at theaters, they were mostly slapstick and comedies and to keep the masses entertained. The theater would last, wasn't a performance that you came in for 2 hours and left. Sometimes went for days. You would eat and drink and even sleep there. The performances would go on one after the other or continuously. And it was mainly a way to keep the masses occupied. That's what we know about the.
So one more quick question about the bathhouses. I think there are a number of people experiencing the winter here that want to order one, but is all of that, it looks quite large. How much wood does that take to heat up something of that size? And were there forests in the area that provided the wood, or do they have to bring that from elsewhere? One of our viewers wants to know.
Well, the Gilboa Mountains, not far away, across a little bit of the valley, and that's where the limestone came from as well. Because the bedrock, the stone around Beit She'an, apart from the tell, of course, which was above it, is lava, is basalt, and thus all the limestone, and certainly the marble had to be imported. No marble in Israel, but all the limestone was probably brought from the Gilboa Mountain. Now, one other thing that I wanted to mention with, we were talking about theater and gladiators and so on. The theater was not for blood sports. They had blood sports in an amphitheater. Sometimes the theater, a stadium, sometimes the theater is wrongly called an amphitheater. It's a theater and not an amphitheater. The amphitheater is more like the stadium, sort of an oval, if you like, where chariot racing and blood sports would take place. Of course, not in the Byzantine period, but since the 10th Legion was also based around, in the Roman period, around Beit She'an, it is very likely that the stadium that you may have seen in the model, just outside of the national park area today, but inside Beit She'an of its day, is actually visible to this day on the main road going into the site of Beit She'an. It's in pretty good condition. There's a big debate of whether actual blood sport took place in that stadium or not, but certainly the blood sports would not take place in the theater. They were in stadiums.
And Reuben, we're getting a couple of people that are asking about the geographic orientation of these sites. Can you just give a brief recap on where this region is in comparison to other parts of Israel that people are familiar with?
Excellent. Beit She'an is actually located, as I said, between the Jezreel Valley and the Jordan Valley. If you sit in the theater seats and look across, we're sort of facing now the tell. And if you look beyond the tell, over the theater, you're actually seeing Jordan, because the Jordan border, the Jordan boundary is there. Now, the situation of Beit She'an is actually, if you like, between, in Israel proper, between the West Bank, which stretches around and up to the peaks of the Gilboa Mountains, and Jordan, and not that far, far enough in the north not to be far from the other borders. But it's
well, Reuven, you have whet our appetite to come back to Beit She'an in person and to visit nearby in the Gilboa to see the incredible mosaics. We had lots of questions about the mosaics, couldn't get to all of them here, but certainly an incredibly preserved synagogue mosaic at Beit Alpha. Incredible riches. And we'll look forward to bringing theater. We're actually talking about bringing some live Israeli theater through the webinar series later in the year. We've done that before, and we're going to do it again, and hopefully one day, maybe even a live performance from Beit She'an. So thanks again, Reuven, for taking us to such a fascinating place. For those of you that are new, you don't want to miss next week. We've got a different kind of virtual tour going on at Kibbutz Lochamei HaGetaot in honor of International Holocaust Remembrance Day. We will be doing a tour inside with one of the educators and members of Lochamei HaGetaot. For those of you that are familiar at all with the history of the trial of Eichmann in Jerusalem, there are some unique artifacts at the museum that we'll be looking at, and some really fascinating material. If you've not visited, you absolutely want to join us again next Sunday for that virtual tour. So we'll sign off for now. Wish everyone a happy and peaceful week with no plagues, earthquakes, viruses of any kind. Maybe even the weather will improve. We had some people in Los Angeles that were bragging at the beginning about the sunny day in Los Angeles. Everybody else seems to be, not as privileged today. So Reuven Leitrot, we'll look forward to seeing you again next month, as always. And thanks for bringing us this amazing tour today.
Shalom. It was a pleasure being with you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.